to the Possibility Perspective with me, Jess. Authentic, bold, and challenging conversations. You'll hear stories from me, conversations with peers, and interviews with experts on a variety of topics, all with different perspectives. Now, let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Possibility Perspective. Today I want to start by asking you some questions. How well do you know yourself? And I ask that because I've asked that question of myself a lot. Do I really know myself? Who am I? What am I here for? What's my purpose? I've asked those big questions. Or maybe you haven't really gotten into those big questions yet, but you've noticed things, right? Patterns in your life that keep showing up, and maybe they're good, maybe they're bad, or even maybe you've noticed things in other people and quirks or tendencies, and maybe they drive you nuts, or maybe you think they're funny, maybe somebody's always pie in the sky, super undetailed, and you can never understand where they're going or what they're talking about. Or maybe you have that one person in your life that's super detail oriented and asks you a ton of questions, and you're like, where is this coming from? Why are you like this? There's tools available to us to understand ourselves better and understand other people better, and there's a ton of those tools, and today we're going to talk about one of them. And my guest today knows this tool well, and actually she has a lot of tools in her kit. She's done a lot of work on herself and has gotten certifications and studied herbalism and shamanism and Reiki and energy work and astrology, which is what we're talking about today, and human design, and I'm probably leaving something off the list. But today we're talking about astrology, and so she's going to bring one of these tools forward for us and help us understand it a little bit. You may be familiar with the horoscope in the Sunday paper, which is not what we're talking about today. But I mean, we have these astrological signs, and I'm going to let Tristen talk more about what all this is today. So let's get into it, because the point of the show is really for me to bring these tools forward to help us understand each other better, to create a more empathetic and compassionate world. Really, that's my bottom line for all of this. So I want a big warm welcome to Tristen, and let's talk about it. Let's talk about astrology, and let's maybe start with what it is and what it isn't.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yay!
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, do you have a question, or can I dive in?
Go
Okay.
right in.
Oh, what it isn't. There's so much it isn't. We'll start with what it is. It is a tool that is really grounded in science and data. And I say this coming to you as someone with an MBA background. I know we focused a lot on my woo-woo background, which I love and is beautiful, but I also come to you with this view of I work in software development. I work my day-to-day with engineers. My everyday world is very grounded. And so I actually came to astrology as a skeptic, and I came to it open heart, but with let me see, is this actually something useful, or is this just, a way to get people to pay money and hopefully maybe sell them on some dreams, right? Which is
Right.
not what, we should happen in a community at all. And so I came to this very much are we sure this is helpful? And it is. And I continue to be astounded by both the magic and the really data behind it. So astrology is not intuition at all. It is not something someone comes to you and is oh, I can intuitively see based on your chart. That's not what it is. We really look at the placements and not the people. So the other thing it isn't is negative. So if you are hearing from someone, oh, you have a double Scorpio sign or Gemini signs or this placement or that placement, and they're coming to it with a very negative kind of fear-mongering vibe, that is not astrology. That is not astrology in its purest form. Just like any of the other kind of spiritual tools, as you mentioned, Reiki and energy work, and things like that, human design, this comes from a very neutral place of being informative and saying there are always gifts and shadows. Here's how you can have knowledge to help validate your experience, and maybe some tools that'll help you as you face things in the future.
Yeah, and that was my experience in my session with you was and you just have this beautiful way of doing this too that made me feel so held, I guess is the way I would put it, because there were things that you were sharing, and yeah, they're not like positive and negative are the words that come to mind, but that's, challenges or what have you. But you have a way of just presenting this as all opportunity. That's the word you were using a lot in our session, is opportunities, because and the word validation comes to mind because there were so many things about myself that I felt, and like especially around my own challenges, that I felt so validated about, like, oh, okay, like that's not just me in my head feeling like, oh, this is hard. It is hard according to the chart. Like the chart tells you it, but that's okay. Now that you know that, you can move past it and you can move forward with it, right? What do you see? So, I mean, I guess let's talk about, if you don't mind talking about your own journey with this a little bit more, expanding upon that. Like, what were some of your big aha moments for yourself that made you go from skeptic to, okay, let's use this tool?
Absolutely, there were several. So I have studied a number of tools, but there's a number of tools before my study that I was just trying to work with experts in the field, people that I had either through word of mouth or seemed as close to vetted as I could possibly get through social media, and that people were having solid results from, and they never felt smarmy. They felt very grounded and very helpful. And so I worked with people that study like numerology and astrology and Reiki. And I worked with several people and I started to gather data. And so I have a whole notebook of readings. And I wanted to see not only what they were saying, but how they got there. And so anytime they said, oh, I'm seeing this, here's kind of what I would expect in your life or expect your experience to be, I'm writing that down. And I'm seeing, like, is this a true experience? Like, I'm very scientific in that capacity. And so, like, I'm gathering everything I can to be like, okay, is this for real? And then as I started to work with my amazing mentor, KJ Atlas, who I initially had a reading with, I was like, this is where I feel called to really spend some time, not just for myself, but I was having so much fun also with talking about it with friends and family. And then my last thought was that I would do this in my business. That was never the goal. Through my mentorship with her, I was like, she very much encouraged me to, but also was very much like, oh, like I've learned so much in this container over many months with her that I feel confident that like I can continue to integrate this even further in my life and help others, And so that was really, really beautiful. But yeah, just, I think it also helps like knowing the experience being out of my 20s, knowing the experience I had with that, knowing the experience I had in my teens, and then seeing like where I had transits, seeing the experiences be validated that, yeah, those are challenging times. They're challenging times either because of collective transits or personal transits. And like, that's really nice to just know. It's that support that you mentioned, that validation, and also I want awareness for what's upcoming. Like I would much rather know how to prepare for something than just be blindsided.
Exactly. Can you explain to people what transits are?
Absolutely. So we have, so I'd like to share it like this. So we all experience weather on Earth, right, as humans. And as a generalization, most people, when it's cold and rainy and dark outside, we feel an energetic depletion and we just want to curl up with a book or movie. And the opposite is true with, when it's sunshiny and 70 degrees and beautiful. So much like the weather on Earth, there is movement in the stars and with the planets. And so these transits are when different planetary and celestial bodies are moving across the zodiac, moving into different signs. And so we have 12 zodiac signs. And so you'll often hear, that a transit being like Mercury is in retrograde. Well, it's actually Mercury in retrograde in a specific sign. And so there's this layering as the planets move, and they're either moving forward in the sky or backwards with retrograde. And they're actually moving through the zodiac that we have, which is so beautiful.
And that creates like these things, like, and let's use Mercury in retrograde as an example, because I think that's something that I mean, at least for the first part of, oh my gosh, for like probably the first several years of me in this position with the Transformation Network, and somebody would say that, and like, I didn't look it up, right? So it just went over my head, and I would just be like, okay, I don't know what that means, but okay. But then when I learned what it was, and then I went back and I started to connect the dots, I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. Like I would have people like, I'm not signing a contract till Mercury's out of retrograde, right? Or like we would have really just weird things happen.
Absolutely, technical glitches that you're like, this
Yeah.
shouldn't happen. No, I get it. No,
Yeah. And so those are the kind of things that make me chuckle because I still don't get it fully. Like I still don't get it. I don't get why that happens, but it like I have so much evidence now for me that it's like, well, okay, I guess I don't have to get it, but I I believe it because there's these things that keep happening. Where was I going with all of that? But just to say, like, for people that are, so for those of you that are watching or listening to this, challenge you to just pay attention to what's going on in your world, right? Because there do seem to be things where like I mentioned in the beginning, like patterns of time where you're like, God, it always seems like blah 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 happens and like why is this happening, right? There sometimes are reasons, there sometimes are explanations for it. And if you're intrigued by any of this, I encourage you to go to musingsandmodalities.com and contact Tristen and get an astrology reading and just kind of like dive into this a little. It's really fascinating, I guess, to say the least. And so let's talk about
do you mind
what?
before we move on, if I can
Yeah.
talk about Mercury a little bit, just to kind of
Yeah.
touch that weather analogy?
Yeah.
So the way I work with Mercury in retrograde is I still live my life with awareness, and there is influence when there are transits, but ultimately you're still a human being on Earth. You know what I mean? You still have stuff you have to do. So like that's a luxury to not to hold off on things that we all often don't have, right? And
Yeah.
so like similarly to when thinking about weather, I think of Mercury in retrograde as like a rain. It's like a drizzle all day. It's like you want your raincoat, you want to prepare, you're gonna maybe leave earlier for an appointment because the roads might not be as good, there could be an accident. Like there are things in my head, like the preparation piece and the ability to just slow down is really what I want to talk about with Mercury in retrograde, because I'm not someone that dreads it. I'm always like, okay, like businesses actually pick up during that time, sales are good. My business birth chart is actually when Mercury was in retrograde, so like it's always like a really nice little bump during that time. And so yeah, it's really just a time for reflection and resting and sitting into it. And I think because we're also overscheduled and trying to do so much, it is very jarring when that energy says no, like you've done enough, like take it back at least 20%, if not 25%.
That's so true. And I find that for myself, like, let's say I make like whoopsie, 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 whoopsie mistake. That's for me, usually should be like alarm bells going off, going, yo, slow down a little bit. You're making a lot of mistakes. Like maybe you're doing too much, you're too frantic, whatever it is, you're moving too fast. Like, dude, just chill out a little bit.
Mhm.
And that may or may not be during Mercury in retrograde, but to your point, we can use these things to our advantage to just be more mindful.
Absolutely. No, it's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that, like, kind of in conjunction with, let's say, like, compassion for ourselves, right? Or maybe even compassion for other people and how that plays in this deeper understanding. Could you talk to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things when people come to me to talk about astrology and their signs or sign up for a reading, I think there's this level of vulnerability that we don't always talk about. And the reason I want to bring that up is because I feel like people often feel like they're going to get graded or they're at the doctor. And that shouldn't be the experience. It's very much like this is a chart, this is a tool, and I want to like kind of orient you to this tool because for most people, it is all the combinations of math, geometry, like it is very overwhelming to see a birth chart and for people to connect with. And so it's like, here's this thing that I'm using to help orient you to. I'll walk you through a little bit because ultimately, if people are interested, I want them to be able to do it for themselves on some level. Like that is one of the things I'm passionate about is everything can be figured out, and like always happy to like work with an expert, pay an expert, but if there's something that you can do in your daily life to just have that awareness, let's do it. And so to get back to that vulnerability piece is so many people are just like, okay, here's my chart, like is it bad? And it's like, no, no, no. Let's have compassion for ourselves. You know, we all have elements in our chart, as you spoke to, of like some tendencies we have, some of that baseline programming we came into this lifetime with. But we also have all of these gifts, and so often people just kind of skate over those gifts or don't receive them fully and embody them. And it's really like, no, 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 this is the good stuff. Like, this is what we get to do in this lifetime, and like how you're supported. And that's really what I want people to understand is like, I love working with Saturn. I love working with our planets. I love working with, the different just aspects of a chart to say like, wow, look at how the universe is holding you. Truly. Like that's ultimately what I want to share. And so making sure they feel held, and I'm so glad you felt that way through that process. And to really leave knowing like, oh, like anything I've heard negative about my sign, especially their sun sign, which is common, like let's leave all that. That's not necessary and it's not helpful.
Yeah, and I want to back to your point, like we're human beings, we have choices, right? We have control over our lives. And so I have this, my belief system is things typically only have as much meaning as we give them. And I think I talked about that in my last episode a little bit when I was talking about signs and superstitions and things. But I think it's the same thing, right? So like, let's say, so here's a perfect example. My sun sign is a Libra, and, I've been told, or it's been said, or what have you, that I have trouble making decisions.
You can see both sides.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
You can see both sides. And that's valuable, right? I hope that. I hope that for all of us. You know what I mean?
Right. And so, you could just take it with that one statement, which
Yep.
is just
Yeah.
and then I could embody that statement, and then I could become this person who has trouble making decisions.
Exactly.
Or I have the choice to reframe that, like you just did,
Yeah.
and say, I'm careful in my decisions because I can see both sides, and I weigh the pros and cons, and here we are, and that has served me well in many instances, right? So
Absolutely.
it is what you decide it is, I guess, is my point with that. And so what would you say to that, like anyone who has had that, like in,
Yeah.
this surface level knowledge, let's say, of what their sun sign is, like what would you encourage them to do?
I would say like completely throw it away, remove it. Just come to this with beginner's mind. And the reason for that is because I want them to come just open-hearted as much as possible. And to also say like you always have free will. So even in a birth chart where we talk about, kind of your opportunities in this lifetime or some transits that are upcoming, like you still have the choice to completely change your trajectory. And it's just the support and influence within the chart to either help you achieve that, or it could be a little bit more challenging depending on your choices. Both are fair, so that doesn't negate any of our free will overall. But yeah, anything negative said about a sign or a placement, like, no, that's not to say there aren't elements where signs and planets are in detriment. It could be a little bit more of a challenge. There could be some opposition in the chart. Like, I don't want to negate that, but I've always found where there's opposition, there's always a chance to say, like, okay, but here's how to work with it. And that's what I want people to understand with. It's not a sentence that says, well, you have this, that's it. It's like, no, no, no. Like, like work through it, figure out ways to overcome it, be mindful of it. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's back to the opportunities word is, I mean, because that's part of life. We are going to come up against obstacles and challenges and things that test us. And I think that, to your earlier point, that's if we can know that a little bit, if we have the awareness of that, then it hits you maybe a little less hard, I guess. And you can like, okay, yep, this is a thing. Now we're going to have to do something about it, and we can move forward with it, right? And that's turning challenges, I guess, or obstacles into opportunities. I don't know, that's probably like a really cliche term, but I think the more tools like this we have and we can apply in our lives, that the better life can be ultimately. I mean, that's been my experience. And just reflecting again on our session together, it was like, yeah, here's some things that really validated some struggles I've had. And I mean, it was emotional. I cried in our session, but in a good way. And because it was so validating for me, I was like, okay, like, thank you. Like, I'm so glad that, like, because you don't know any of my like personal journey or struggles, right? So it's just written here in this chart. And also what was really exciting and really encouraging to me is the other part of that, which was like, here's all of the opportunities in front of you. Here's some things to look forward to. And I felt this like renewed, I don't know, excitement about my life. I mean, because in the timing of our time together was, I think I said this in our session too, was just so good because I was feeling a little like, what is the point, right? Like, I just feel like I've had this like thing and thing and thing and thing and thing. And I came out of that with like, okay, yeah, okay, cool. I can learn from it. I can grow from it. And now I have this other thing. And I feel like a session like that for me is so much better than, because seriously, like the last thing you want to hear from somebody when you're stuck in something or like you feel like things are hard is just like blanketly saying to you, this too shall pass. Or like, that's like, but you had like real information and data, like you said, that could be like, but look at this, right? And so that was the most exciting part for me. I'm curious, you do these sessions often, so what do you like, what excites you about like what you see in other people? Or give me, if you have a story to share about, like some aha moments or like big lighting, exciting moments from people.
Absolutely. I think some of the most impactful ones are when people have had previous readings and they really didn't connect with the information shared. Just like doctors and therapists, there are good and bad, in all professions. So
Yeah.
just because an astrologer didn't click with you the first time or in your previous experience doesn't negate the tool. And so it's really about finding the right person to show you how to use that tool and embody it in your life. And so that's happened several times where people are at times of transition, which is so beautiful to work through because they're ultimately like a bit at their wits' end. They need direction, and providing really tangible ways using their birth chart, using kind of their personalized blueprint in the stars to give them something real that they can add into their daily routines, really like focus on in their life, tendencies to kind of avoid and tendencies to encourage is lovely. And so I'll get text from people and previous clients that maybe had like one session with me and maybe did not do energy work or anything, and they will tell me like, I've had this incredible year, my business has like exploded, like all of these elements of their life have just been completely transformed. And of course, though they try to credit me in some way, like it is their doing, right? It's because of a tool that they felt validated, they felt seen, and they were able to implement hopefully some habits that I shared with them, but ultimately they made the choice to make that happen, which is so powerful and beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. What in your own life would you share has been like the most profound, like maybe validation or aha moment with this tool?
I would say working with my North Node. And that's why I love like focusing on it so much. So we have North and South nodes of the moon, and everyone has this represented in their chart. And the North node is our North node of destiny, just to kind of orient everyone. And so mine is in Aquarius in the seventh house. And throughout my life, I've had these elements of wanting to be in the spotlight when I want the attention, and then spending the rest of the time in the shadows. And it got really comfortable, especially in my 20s, spending that time in the shadows. And then in my early 30s, I really deepened my understanding with astrology, started working with KJ, understanding kind of the nodes overall, and learning that my goal in this lifetime is to really like use my gifts and talents to help community, to help bring innovation, and to help drive change. And to feel all of that backing was like both like, ugh, okay, I guess I can't hide in the shadow anymore, right? Like I never do a North Node reading with someone and they're always like, oh, that's not me. They're always like, it's like a bone deep sigh where they just know it's true, and
Yeah.
all right, I gotta get to work, is typically the reaction. And so like I find that so beautiful to say like, okay, this is where I'm gonna spend my time. And that's why I have my own like podcast now. Like all of those things aligned for me once I accepted like this is my destiny. And then it just opened up all these doors in a beautiful, magical way to like set me up for success in those elements. So
The word magic,
yeah.
because you use that in a lot of your work, and so how do you and actually I think you did a podcast episode on this. I'll find it and I'll link it in this for everybody who should go listen to it or watch it, because you talked about like being this like scientific, analytical, but then also like believing in the magic of the world. Like, how do you blend those two in your life?
Yeah, so I love childlike wonder and joy. And I find like if I don't find joy in my week, if I don't have expansiveness in my day for like something incredibly cool and supportive, and really when I say magical, it's ultimately supportive. It's an influence that I could not imagine that I'm open to receiving to help me get whatever I'm trying to do done or open up a door to some kind of fresh start or new opportunity. And so magic is just such a fun word because support can often feel like not overused, just it's kind of mundane,
Yeah.
like when possible, I try to take things from the mundane to the magical, just because it makes me happy more than anything. And so yeah, I always just try to leave room for the mystical, for things that I just can't fathom to unfold.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so one of the tools you gave me to do, because I've tried journaling. It just like really, it's not my thing. But one thing you gave me to do that I've done since our session is not really journaling, but I just write down the kind of magical moments. And so I can reflect on it because like you'd mentioned, like I can use my analytical brain to go back to see the data to like just remind myself of these beautiful magical moments that do happen. And so one of the things, this is so random, but because we're talking about astrology and maybe this has meaning and maybe it doesn't, but the full moon was setting on my way to work today. And so my whole drive to work was just the moon here. And I'm like, had to remind myself to keep looking at the road because it's just like this beautiful moon in front of me and I couldn't stop looking at it. And I just like took a moment and like breathe it in. And I was like, oh, this feels like a magical moment. Like, I don't know what about it. Like, and whatever, like, cool. Like, it made me feel good. It made me feel happy. And it like kind of pumped me up to talk to you this morning and like have this show. But I don't know. It just, those are the types of things too that like, honestly, I don't really fully understand how the moon works and sets and tides. And, I know that sounds, I probably sound really stupid, but I mean, I
No,
understand.
I was like, I don't either. Truly, I don't think we're supposed to. Not all of it, right? There's a science of understanding about the moon, but there are secrets in the moon. Like, let's just be real.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just was like kind of just took in the magic of the moon this morning and I was like, "Oh, this is so great." And so for those of you watching or listening to this, that would be my other takeaway here is what kind of magic can you find in your day to day? Just like these little moments that you can just take in and make you feel good or make you smile for a minute. Because I think if we can do that more too, then, life feels more enjoyable. I think if we can just do that, right?
Absolutely. We're always looking for ways to replenish, and I don't want replenishment to mean yet another thing I have to do to feel better.
Yeah, exactly. What would be your parting words for us? Anything you have to say about astrology, life, magic, any of it?
What a great question. I would say anytime you're looking to learn something new, right? Just to reiterate kind of that beginner's mind piece, it is beautiful to try to find your own way to it. It is beautiful to try to figure out what works for you because not everything will, and that's okay. But I think being open to experiences, being open to using really ancient knowledge in a way, especially with astrology, is such a gorgeous way to connect with the earth. And I don't think that's often talked about, but like when we're able to do that and we're able to connect with seasons, like it's so much more than just a birth chart. It's it sounds trite to say it's a lifestyle, but it's a way of living with intention. That's what I'll say. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for being here today with me. Thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom. Everyone, so musingsandmodalities.com. You can go there and see all the things Tristen has to offer, and I really encourage you to go book a session. It is literally transforming. If you've never done an astrology session, I think they should do like the main like birth chart reading first, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you could do like a second one and do the north and south nodes like I did, which was really cool too. So maybe do both. That is my suggestion to everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for all that you are in the world and being open to new perspectives. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to The Possibility Perspective on Transformation Talk Radio. For more information about the show, you can subscribe to the podcast. Visit thepossibilityperspective.com.